Okay, fire away.
When learning Gemara, how much should a person prioritize just getting shot in a Rishon in Tosfos versus trying to engage in creativity, figuring out the Shorosh Machlokes, why the Ritva says what he says versus the Rosh? But it seems like one often comes at the expense of the other.
Well, it does in respect to time. You haven't got time to do everything that you want to do, and you'll have to divide your time. I don't have a prescription for everybody. I can't talk about everybody's mental abilities and scholarly abilities. I think the general approach to learning, which is very valuable, is to split your time between what's called iyun and bekiyus. And iyun means trying to understand and throwing hypotheses and see, and then if you're up to it, you try to look at what the Achronim do, because that's what the Achronim do. But the other is to just cover ground and gather information. Even if what you understand, you don't understand correctly. It doesn't matter. So I know in Hasidic yeshivas, they have a principle. I guess it's usually in the morning where they do analysis. In the afternoon, they learn so as to finish the entire Masechta. So you saw the whole Masechta. And I think that's very valuable because there's a gigantic, there's 2,700 daf. She says 5,400 pages of Babylonian Talmud. And the more that you just see, the more your mind is filled with new examples of different types of reasoning or different types of sources and information about what the Talmud's position is or its reasoning is. So I think to focus only on one or only on the other is a big mistake. When you're doing analysis, you're creating new abilities of grappling and understanding and theorizing and checking theories and so forth and so on. And that's an ability that's very important to pick up. But it's also important to have some information about what the Talmud goes into. So I started out that way because of the training that I was given at the beginning. And I think it was very, very valuable. So I don't know how much time you have and how much you can divide your time. But sometimes just reading Gemara with Rashi and saying, okay, that's what it seems to say, and going on is very valuable.
Once you're already in Ian, you're already getting deep into some of the Rishonim. So there's a lot of unanswered questions in terms of
That's right.
the differences that you're seeing. So Rabbi then suggests that it makes more sense to look into the Achronim to flesh that out versus try to kind of...
I think so because the theorizing that you'll do is so uninformed that it could be really off the page. Now I remember, I forget how many years ago this was, but there used to be a Gottleib here in Ohr Somayach where they learned an Amud a day. And whoever the Rosh Gottleib went elsewhere and he set up his own place. And he taught us how to read a Rishon fast. An Amud a day, and with the basic Rishonim, you had to do that. Of course, there are diukim, analysis of precise language and comparisons and try and contrast that you could learn more from. But to get the general picture of where this Rishon stands, and if you're going to look at, let's say, at four main Rishonim, so you see who is Machmir and who's Mekel, who's Oser and who's Matir, right? And who are they Paskin like, and so forth and so on. You get a general picture of where things lay, and then you can go back and analyze. But the ability to read a Rishon fast, which I didn't have at the time, it took me a year and a half to pick it up, became very, very valuable. Because later, when you want to analyze a certain concept, you know who speaks about it, and where he speaks about it, what to go back to, and to use as your information for the deeper analysis. Not everything is going to be relevant. I think that having the ability to do that and then choosing and spending some time on analysis is worthwhile. I'll tell you one more little story, then I'm going to open up to everybody. I was learning about Sikh-Shalevsky, which was one golden year that I had 43 years ago. And I think we were learning about Metzia, and I had an argument against him from a Ran. And I showed him the Ran, and I said, "It's a diuk in the Ran." And he said to me, "That's not a diuk." End of story. That's the way it is in certain yeshivas, figure it out, I figured out because the Ran was discussing Hilchos Shabbos. And he brought in Bava Metzia just as an illustration of how to use it for the sake of Hilchos Shabbos. So his subject wasn't Bava Metzia. His subject was Shabbos. And if I'm going to try to use what he said about Bava Metzia there to learn the principle of Bava Metzia, I'm making a mistake, because that wasn't his subject. And then I came across a Gemara in Moy Cotton, where it talks about how do you deal with the Sefer Torah, how do you treat a Sefer Torah. And one question is, do you ever put it on the ground? And the answer is no, you never put a Sefer Torah on the ground. But when the Gemara is talking about must you hold it or must you not hold it, the phraseology for not holding it is put it on the ground. It doesn't mean put it on the dirt. It just means don't hold it. But that's all it meant in that context. So yeah, this kind of nicety of logic and paying attention to the context, like this, there are at least 100 different other things to learn about how to handle text and how to handle ideas and so forth and so on. So I think that, floating your ideas like that is not worth a lot of time. Not worth a lot of time. Okay, I'm going over. Yeah, nice to see you. Yeah.
At the end of Bereshit, it's talking about kind of the wicked generation and God seeing that the people on earth are behaving badly, and it says, and Hashem reconsidered having made man on earth, and he had heartfelt sadness. But I think specifically the word I want to focus on is the reconsidered.
It's a bad translation.
Okay.
It's a bad translation. And Rashi right there says that the word in Hebrew, Yinachem, means to consider changing a strategy that you've been using up until now, and from now on, using a different strategy.
Right.
So it doesn't mean, although actually, now that I think of it, a reconsider, it depends on how you take it. Reconsider can mean, let's go back. Some translate regret. Right. And that would mean I made a mistake before. Yeah. And that's not on the page. Sorry, that's not on the page. Right? Now, reconsider can mean I had a certain attitude, but now circumstances are different, and now I'm going to judge whether, in the new circumstances, the old strategy was appropriate. That could be. Okay. That could be. And that's what Rashi explains it.
I think that kind of still raises the problem of an omniscient God has knowledge of the consequences of creation. So it's why is there a need for reconsidering if he knows what him doing A will lead to B? Yeah.
So I think you're onto a very important question. It's a very important question. It occurred to me not too long ago that the way we understand what God is, like you say, he's omniscient, the idea of his acting is very difficult. The idea of his deciding what to do is very difficult to explain. Because, let's imagine what it means to make a decision. Well, I could do A or B. And now I'm considering the options and considering the consequences, and then I'm deciding on the spot which one I will do. Yeah, but yesterday he already knew which one he was going to do. So there's no deciding to be done. So I don't think, I've asked this recently from people who are serious scholars, and they agree with me that to describe God as making a decision is to describe something which, in terms of his official abilities, is something which can't be. Okay, fine, but still, Kadosh Baruch Hu wants us to relate to him in a human fashion, so he presents himself to us in that fashion. And the attitude which you have to take it is, given who we are, given our mental capacities and limitations, this is the best picture for us to work with, even though some elements of the picture can't be maintained literally. Okay. So I think that's right. You're absolutely right. Even without reconsidering, but the idea of considering what to do is very difficult to maintain if a being is omniscient. Very good. Yeah. What else is up? Yeah.
What is Judaism's view on marriage and on the roles of men and women in society? Because the more I learn it, the more I feel a bit confused.
Well, I'm glad that we're going to be here till 1:30 a.m. because that'll give me time to go through this. I have recorded Sherm on the subject. I don't think that there's a simple answer to the question. It subdivides into dozens of different questions. I can tell you certain headlines, but it's not going to satisfy, and it shouldn't satisfy your interest. I have some recordings on the subject, and there are a lot of books written on the subject. Men and women are fundamentally different. And I think I mentioned this the other day in passing. The fact that they're different gives marriage, and yes, marriage is between one man and one woman, period. Well, okay, polygamy is an interesting question, but between man and woman. The very fact that there are differences mean that to relate to the other person, you have to be able to step out of yourself. If you have somebody who's a mimic of you, who's just a clone of you, then you just fall into a natural pattern of sharing the same reactions and sharing the same priorities and sharing the same enjoyments, and then there's no reason to step out of yourself. Here, the challenge is to step out of yourself to build something larger. It's crucial that both the husband and the wife recognize that their role is to create together something bigger than each one. You may have heard the idea that a woman's supposed to be a helper to her husband, some certain kind of helper to her husband. So the women read that rightly, and the men read that wrongly, and they don't reflect on the fact that if God says you need a helper, then you're in trouble because you can't make it. Otherwise, why would he create you a helper? You're already perfect. You're already self-sufficient. You're already finished. What do you need a helper for? The message is you need help. So take that to heart and realize that if you think you can make it on your own and she's just there to fix dinner, you're making a big mistake. The idea wasn't just that she should fix your dinner. So that kind of appreciation of each other, she of course appreciates the husband because her goal is to help enable him to realize his potential. And he has to realize that he won't be able to realize his potential without leaning on her and relying on her. So in the marriage, they have different roles, but difference doesn't imply inequality. This is one of the hundreds of mistakes that the non-Torah informed public makes about these matters. Mere difference doesn't imply inequality. You have a Beethoven violin sonata. So you have a violinist and a pianist. Well, a violin is not a piano, and a piano is not a violin. That doesn't make one superior and the other inferior. You take a Supreme Court justice, you take someone who's commanding a submarine squadron in the Navy. Those are very, very different activities. Not obvious that one is superior or inferior to the other. The fact that things are different doesn't mean that you have an inequality. So and then the final thing I'm going to say now is we measure the success of a spiritual life. The highest possible level of success in spiritual life is prophecy. And our tradition tells us that in the 1,000 years of prophecy, there were 600,000 men and 600,000 women. It sounds like they have equal access to the highest level of spiritual success. There is something called death by a divine kiss, which is poetry. Oh, I shouldn't have to say that, but who knows, right? And there are 3 people on record, doesn't mean that there are only once, but 3 people on record who died by a divine kiss, and they are Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. Siblings. So the idea that there's inherent superiority or inferiority is something that's very, very difficult to maintain. And those who are interested in the subject, last comment, when you talk about superior and inferior, you have to say in what dimension, in what respect. And there are at least a dozen different dimensions of which things should be measured here. So, that being the case, it's going to be very difficult to make that kind of judgment. But in practical terms, there are many, many books that are written on the subject, and there's a lot to say. Yeah, who's that?
Sorry, could you please move your left arm beneath the cord? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.
Can irreligious or atheist people have meaningful lives?
Can irreligious or atheist people have meaningful lives? Well, meaningful is a very, very broad term.
By the Jewish definition as well.
Yeah, I took it that we're talking about the Jewish definition. One big barrier is that an atheist cannot fulfill any mitzvah. The Ramban says this in his introduction to the book of Job, and it's taken for granted, I think, because the very idea of a mitzvah is a commandment. And you don't respond to a commandment if you don't believe in the commander. I'll give you a very simple illustration of this, even in simple terms. You're in the army, and your commanding officer says, I command you to shut the window. You didn't hear him, but you're cold. So you go and you shut the window. Did you obey the command? Certainly did not. You just happened to do what the command ordered you to do, but you didn't obey the command. To obey the command, you have to hear it, recognize it, and decide to do what you're told. So the same thing is true with mitzvahs. You can't fulfill a mitzvah unless you intend that what you do should satisfy your obligation that the Creator has put upon you. And the Gemara talks about this in a very interesting way. It's a Mishnah in Megillah, but I'll give you an illustration. I've decided that I need a new pair of tefillin. So I go to the tefillin store. He opens early. I'm there at 7:30 in the morning. And he says, look, try these on and see if you like it. So I try them on. I try them on. Yeah, they fit well. They feel fine. They look sturdy. They look really fresh. You do. I take them off and I say, yeah, I'll take them. And I said, wait a minute. I had them on from 7:40 to 7:50, 10 minutes. I did the mitzvah. How about that? You don't have to have more than 10 minutes with tefillin to do the mitzvah of tefillin. And I did it. No, you didn't, because you didn't have in mind God commanded me to put on tefillin. I'm doing this to satisfy His command. You did it to try on the size. That doesn't count as doing the mitzvah. So an atheist, by definition, can't fulfill any mitzvahs. Now, what the extent to which his life will be meaningful and have positive meaning or negative meaning will depend upon his responsibility. Some atheists are responsible for being atheists because they were put in a circumstance where the information was denied them. There's no way for them to find out. Some people brought up in the Soviet Union that there was just absolutely no Jewish resources in their environment. You can't hold them responsible for being an atheist. So fulfilling a mitzvah is impossible to do. Whether he gets credit for the decisions that he makes, the responsible decisions and the rest, it probably would depend upon, if he's a real atheist, why he's doing them. And if he has one of the many false deflationary theories of ethics, then it'll certainly be worthless. And if he has a sense that there's something more, a sense of something he doesn't understand, a sense of something that really puts an obligation on him and it's real, maybe that could be understood as a beginning of a consciousness of a creator, because where would it come from? What would justify it? What would give the authority? So maybe that would be a kind of gray area. But a person who's a consistent, closed materialist, what we would call a meaningful life is not available to him. Now, if you ask them what purpose does he have in the world, the best answer that I know to questions like that is reincarnation. We have a big limitation. We say a life is birth to death, and that's it. Now, where's the meaning for that? Where's the value of that? Why should that exist? But from the majority of our sources, certainly from the Kabbalistic tradition, What you see from birth to death is only one chapter in a multi-chapter biography, which could have 100 chapters in it. And that soul has many appearances in the world. And in some of them, it won't be the life of an atheist. So then that'll be incorporated into a development. That certainly helps with that question.
Does that kind of answer still stand when you talk about, let's say, someone who's Jewish but doesn't believe in God, and so does actions out of the feeling of goodwill, of like, I want to do a good deed because it's the right, or because I feel that it's the right thing to do? Would that be the same answer?
Well, of course, I was talking about Jewish people. I wasn't talking about non-Jews.
Right.
And I guess it might depend upon what's behind his feeling that it's the right thing to do.
Okay.
If he would be rightfully intolerant of relativists and rightly intolerant of nihilists who want to say, yeah, it all depends upon your society, or no, this thing is right and wrong anyway, and it's all a matter of feeling, and his steadfast opinion is, no, it's wrong to do that. That might be a start. I don't know how far it would take him, but that might be a start. Yeah.
I have two questions. The first one I just thought up while you were answering Saul's question. By the logic that a non-Jewish person cannot fulfill the mitzvah because he doesn't know he's been commanded to do it, would a Jewish person with a mental impairment that prevents them from, recognizing the world around them, be able to fulfill any mitzvahs?
So first of all, I didn't say anything about non-Jewish. And right now, when he asked me, I said those who are Jewish people also. So I'm talking about an atheist. The word atheist is neutral between Jew and non-Jew. A non-Jew could be an atheist, and a Jew could be an atheist. So I wasn't talking about non-Jews particularly. There are people who are incapable of fulfilling mitzvahs. I hope this won't come as a blow to you, but 30% of your lifetime, you're incapable of fulfilling mitzvahs because you're asleep. Why is that? Why do I exist at that time? And so on and so on. Okay. There's a place for your life even with sleep. And there's something that these people are there for. They may be there as an opportunity for others to treat them in certain ways. Certainly at the end of life. For some people, you have that they're not capable of fulfilling mitzvahs because they don't have either the mental or physical abilities to fulfill mitzvahs. And they're still alive, and someone would kill such a person, be guilty of murder, or would die for it. So we don't say that because of that inability, the person's life is meaningless, but the meaning that it may have is that it contributes certain opportunities for other people. And that's very meaningful. Yeah, you had another question that you started with.
The other question I had was also something to do with translation, and it was based on last week's parsha and this week's parsha. I understand why the translation, when Yaakov sends messengers or angels ahead of him to Asaph, I understand why it's angels because of the context of last week's parsha, the end of it, where he said he encountered angels. But why, in last week's parsha, it says Malachei Elokim. In this week's parsha, it just says Malachim. Why do we even consider that Yaakov can command angels at this point?
So first of all, you're saying it very well. The word malach in Hebrew does not mean angel. You said it very well. That's why it has to say Malachei Elokim. Malach in Hebrew really means agent. I know everybody says messengers. That's just wrong. You don't always use a malach to carry a message from one place to another. A malach is like what we call in Hebrew also a shliach. He does a job for you. He executes something in your name. If it happens to be a legal action, then you will get the legal result of what he does. That's what a shliach is. And malach is for the word from malacha. Malacha is a certain type of activity, and he's a person who performs that kind of activity. That's all. So usually you have to specify Malachei Elokim to get the meaning of angel. That's why I always translate it as agent of God, or angel without putting God in, because angel automatically includes God. So now you're right. Here in this week's parsha, It says Malachim, and that's why there's a split in commentators. Some say for that reason that he sent people, but some say, look, it's back to back with the previous parsha, and Yaakov started that parsha with Malachim, and ended that parsha with Malachim, and now he's sending Malachim. So it could be that the Torah expects you from the context to realize this isn't a brand new story with brand new agents. It's a continuation of the old story. By the way, you know that the end of the parashiyos have absolutely no significance whatsoever in interpreting the text. The end of the parsha is how much they went on Shabbos. That's it. People may often make a mistake and think, okay, that's the end of that chapter. And now here's a new chapter, right? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Those divisions came in much, much later, when the custom of reading the Torah once a year took hold. And by the way, there were places where they read it once in 3 years, so they wouldn't have the same divisions. I mean, it's really, of course, the greatness of the people who set them up is important to recognize. But you shouldn't, we often point out that Rashi says what he says because he's reading through the parsha break into the next parsha as if it's one text. And it is one text. So you shouldn't worry about that. And certainly, by the way, the chapters and verses in our book were made by medieval Christians. Medieval Christians. So that also, you never say this is the end of a chapter and so forth and so on. It's absolute nonsense. Let's go back to the beginning. Yeah, so if you just read it as one text, he saw a camp, saw Malachim, and he said it was a camp of Malachim, and then it says he sent Malachim. It's one continuous story, so it isn't as if you have to divorce it. I think that, and it isn't, there are two opinions about whether you have to. Now, why should he be able to command Malachim? Well, let me tell you a story. It says by Abraham that Sarai, the servant of Sarah, was upset and she ran from the house, and a malach, Elohim, appeared to her and said, "Where are you going?" And she says back where she's going. And then another one appears and says, "Why are you running?" And she says, "Why?" There's a whole conversation back and forth between her and Malachim. So some of the commentators ask, why didn't she drop dead of fright? I guess she saw a Malach. How could she stand that? And the answer was, in Abraham's house, this was common. She was used to it. So, how should I put it? You know, in Abraham's house, the Malachim were sent, according to one opinion, they were sent to be the people whom he would serve so that he would have an opportunity to do hospitality. I mean, for these people, Malachim were not overwhelming. They were not overawing, and they could deal with them, you know, directly. And here, these are the Malachim that accompanied him, that were accompanying him all the time in Israel. And then a new band accompanied him on his travels outside of the land of Israel. So they're embodiments of his relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. To me, it's not very far-fetched to say that he could send them. Of course, they would have to make themselves available for this task. They're agents of the Kadosh Baruch Hu. But that he would be able to do that? In general, our picture is that Malachim are inferior to human beings. So wouldn't be a shocking thing. Yeah.
What does it mean that some people will say that your top kid in life is your biggest avoidance that you have to work on, like your biggest challenges, like, but an example, like how would someone who has a stealing problem, has a big fever problem, like how is that his challenge that he needs in the Kaddish to elevate?
How someone who what?
Who has like a stealing problem.
A stealing problem. Well, I'll give you a little bit of background. The Ramchal writes about this, and by implication, Tosfos talks about this. Picture Adam and Chava. They were in Gan Eden, and there was the tree of knowledge, and they had a job to do, and they failed. What was that replaced by? That was replaced by a gigantic human population, each person with their own soul, which we understand to be slices of Adam's soul. And now the job of perfecting that particular challenge has been subdivided. Each person has a slice in perfecting some aspect of that challenge. And these aspects are distributed across the sum total of differences in human circumstances. So, for example, one person is put into the world to perfect service of Hashem in poverty. Nothing he does will make him rich or even get him out of poverty. He can be a perfect tzaddik. He's not being punished. This is extremely important. This is the great granddaddy of all principles which explain why so-called innocent people suffer. And that's because sometimes suffering is what they have to perfect. That's precisely the thing that they have to perfect. And other people will be wealthy. Wealth, according to our sources, Mishlei, the Gemara, wealth is a greater and more dangerous challenge than poverty. But that's what they were selected to do. And that's what they're going to have. So, a person may have the challenge of overcoming strong desires to do the wrong thing. And that is a great challenge, and it's something which is also a human perfection that's necessary to put in context with all the other human perfections. I mentioned to you that I've just recently been learning the Tanya for the fourth time in my life. This time I got something out of it. The first 3 times I didn't understand a word. But he says something very interesting. If you are bothered by disturbing foreign thoughts while you pray, while you're learning, or other times, and your tendency is to say, boy, I must really be a rotten person to have such terrible thoughts, he says that's a big mistake. On the contrary, that's what you were put here to do, to fight with those thoughts. It's precisely the challenge that goes, well, you do what he wants you to be doing. So you're not rotten because you have them. You were chosen to fight with them. So that's the attitude that we have. And then, that being the case, it's a person should feel, look, this is what I was put in the world to fight with, and that can be my challenge, to fight with it. So what this principle does is it subtracts the idea of reading the value of your spirituality and the evaluation that Gottleib has of what you do with your circumstances. That doesn't follow. Your circumstances can be dictated by what is called Mazel Elyon, the higher Mazel, which is simply the purpose for which you were put into the world. So that could be a purpose. No doubt about it. That could be a purpose. Yeah.
I believe it's from Derech Hashem that we learned that Hashem wants to bestow His best good upon people, upon His creation, but in order to do that, He created people with the free will that they must struggle with their Yetzer Hara and do Torah mitzvah and good and Masim Tovim to achieve that greatest good, which is Olam Haba. Now, if I'm not mistaken, once Mashiach comes, it is said that Hashem will shech the Yetzer Hara. Now, what I'm wondering is, if in order to attain the greatest good, you must struggle in this world with the Yetzer Hara, why would we want the Mashiach to come?
Okay, that's a good question. It's a common question. Why do we want the Mashiach to come if there won't be time to continue to earn any merit, because there won't be any decision, any free will, because the Yetzer Hara won't be there. So first of all, not everybody agrees that the Yetzer Hara will be destroyed at that time. Some take that reference to destroying the Yetzer Hara to be at a later time, leaving open the time of the Mashiach as a time when you do have free will. Second of all, just as a headline, if Hakadosh Baruch Hu told us that we should daven for it, that means it's good for us. You have a right to ask why it's good and how it's good. That's okay. But the fact is not in question, because He told us to do that. But there's a subtlety here. I mean, there may be 16, but I know one of them. There's a subtlety here. Let me start with a parallel. Let's suppose a person, let's say when he's 16, is struggling with a Yetzer Hara to steal or something else, and he works hard on it, and it's a struggle, and over a number of years, he creates a consistent, habitual pattern of behavior which succeeds in doing the right thing. And after a period of time, he's just trained himself to do that. And he gets to the point where it's not even a decision anymore. Someone would offer him the opportunity to steal. He'd say, who are you talking to? Are you crazy? Why would I do that? Now the question of Desta asks is, does he continue to get credit for not stealing after it's become habitual and there's no temptation and he's no longer making a decision not to steal? And the answer he gives is yes, because you created for yourself that habit which then acts out the not stealing in the future. You get credit for all the outcome, all the consequences of that effort, just like in all of life, you get credit or discredit, depending upon what they are, for the consequences of what you do. It's a little bit like this. People ask, if I'm going to work to earn my reward, is there a kind of measure of how much reward, how much work is worth? And especially since the reward from our point of view is infinite, it's eternal. So how could whatever amount of work you do make it your credit to the point where you're going to get an infinite reward? Now, one answer to that is, it depends on how you're being paid. Being paid by the hour, then you're absolutely right. It's a certain fixed sum of compensation per hour. You live so many years, you work so many hours, and that's going to be a finite amount. But let's try a different analogy. Let's suppose you have these naturalists who go to the forest and they build their own house. You know, they use their fingernails or something. I don't know, an axe, maybe an axe. They compromise with an axe. And they made themselves a house. Now let's say he makes himself, it takes him 10 years to make a house. He moves in, and 30 years later, somebody says to him, you know, you spent 10 years building this house. How much merit did you get? How much credit do you have? How much do you deserve to be compensated for 10 years of work? 20 years of residence. But you've been here 30 years. Aren't you out running your welcome? Aren't you sort of taking advantage, free advantage of something that you don't deserve? Here, he's not being paid by the hour, but he's creating a new reality. If he created it, he can live in it, and he can live in it forever. And the way you earn your reward the world to come, one understanding of it is you change your own nature. You create for yourself a new reality, and that reality gives you access to the world to come. So there's no limitation on how much you've earned and how much you deserve. So let's go back to the Yemos of Mashiach. We daven that Mashiach should come. Well, maybe our davening is part of what brings the Mashiach. If our davening is part of what brings the Mashiach, and if when the Mashiach comes, the reality will blot out the Yetzer Hara, and there will be no more free decisions, but we helped create that reality. And if we help create that reality, we can get credit for what we do in that reality, just like training ourselves to have a habit. So I think that's part of the idea. I think this plays a role in the Rambam, but okay, I'm not going to go with that now. Yeah.
Is there a way to, there's an idea that every individual is given a specific kli, they themselves, to receive a certain amount of bracha in their life. Is there a way to elevate that vessel to make it larger to receive more bracha, like for limud Torah, parnasa, or just health in general?
Absolutely, you're right. We have a certain capacity to receive, but the Pei Tzaddik actually says your words. He says you're going to ask, please give us our share in your Torah. First you should ask, make me into a bigger vessel, be able to receive more Torah, because otherwise asking for it will be pointless because you won't be able to receive it. So I think that's absolutely right. And in fact, I think this idea is encapsulated in the word Baruch, the way I understand it. The word Baruch has at least 6 different explanations, and then of course they're all true. I want to focus on 2 of them. One, I believe the Nefesh HaChaim says, Baruch is a passive. Just like Shavur means broken, and Shalom means paid, so Baruch means received a blessing. Something blessed it. So we say Baruch Atah Hashem, it means you receive blessing. That's a challenging idea. How could he receive blessing? Now, we have a proof that that's true because Chazal say, Ezu Chassid, who is a Chassid? Now, in literal Hebrew, Chassid is a practitioner of Chesed. Chesed is loving kindness. So who is the one who earns the title of being a practitioner of loving kindness? Hamas Chasedim Kono, someone who does Chesed to his Creator. Well, doing Chesed means to do kindness to someone, to give something good to that someone, and here it means says to do it to your Creator. So it's got to be possible to do that. Now back to what I said to you. In other words, we have this picture, in a certain sense, like talking about God's head and shoulders and legs, but it's a picture that we're supposed to use. So, what's his goal? His goal, like you said, is to give good to us. That's the ultimate purpose of the creation. But he wants the good to be as perfect as possible. And in order for it to be perfect as possible, we have to earn it. So when we do mitzvos, we are putting ourselves in a position to be able to receive what he wants to give us, receiving it as having earned it, and then he can carry out what he wants to do. So that's Baruch as the source of bracha. So Baruch means both recipient of bracha and source of bracha. I think both are true, and they imply a relationship with us, a relationship of mutual bracha. We're mevarachim and he's mevarach us. I think that's what's going on. So when you say Baruch in the Shemona Esrei or bracha, stop and think for 3 seconds. It's this interaction with the 2 of you. I'll tell you something else which I saw in the Malbim. It's a pasuk that we say quite often, V'hi noam Hashem Elokeinu aleinu. Literally, the noam, which is pleasantness of Hashem our God, should be on us. Okay, that's poetry. It's not clear what exactly it refers to. So the Malbim says something really astonishing. He says, when we do a Kodesh Baruch Hu's Ratzon, he has pleasure from that. And then he enables us to feel his pleasure in what we do. His pleasure in what we do is something that can apply to us also. We can sort of, it's projected onto us. We feel how pleased he is with us. That's an astonishing thing. That's a symptom of this kind of relationship, this kind of interactive relationship. So yes, you definitely have to think in terms of making yourself a capable recipient of more, and then ask for the bracha for it to come, 100%. Yeah, last question?
Yeah. So some sages say that the Moshiach, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the Moshiach will come by the year 6000. What implications will there be, if any, if the Moshiach does not come by?
Okay, that's a very good question. These questions are really first class. Yaakov Kamenetsky said to his students that since the Rambam explicitly rejects 6,000, and the Barbanel also rejects 6,000, no one can say that it is the principle of the Jewish tradition that the Mashiach has to come by 6,000. No one can say that. And so if he doesn't come by 6,000, so then we'll say, that in this respect, the Rambam was right and the others were wrong. It's really quite remarkable. It's not unanimous. The Rambam, as they say in our circle, he's a man d'omer. He has the right to have a position, and it's a major position. He said, it's a Gemara actually, this business of the 6,000, but in the Gemara it's a statement of one sage. So the Rambam says we are not required to accept the statement of a single sage. And the Rambam says more than that. He says, number one, he says, if you think that 6,000 is the end of time, then what that sage says contradicts you, because he says, this world is 6,000, and after that, there's another 1,000 years or something else. And you can't have 1,000 years without time. That's number one. And number two, he says, I have sources both in verses in the Tanakh and in the statements of other sages which contradict what this sage says. So, he says, I'm not inclined to accept it.
Is there any time, apart from that, is there any kind of conclusive time frame given for the Mashiach to come, or is it kind of less?
So it's very, very interesting. The Rambam's view is that our world, with our dynamics, goes on forever. Why that shouldn't be is a very difficult question. Just recently I have a student in England who gave me a very nice answer. I talked with one of my chavrusis the other night. He gave me another answer, which are, maybe I'll talk about it on another occasion. So, but it's a question of why it should end at all. And if there's no ending to it, then I don't know. I don't know whether if no ending to it, then is there a time limit within which the Mashiach has to come? I can't say that I know all of the Rambam, but remember anything in the Rambam which would indicate such a thing? I don't know. Maybe there are others. I have no idea. Okay. All right. Very, very good session.